Adrienne Mitchell had always loved her Tuesday afternoons. There was something peaceful about sitting on that old wooden bench in Riverside Park, watching the world go by while she ate her homemade turkey sandwich. The park wasn't anything special, really. Just a small patch of green space tucked between office buildings and residential apartments, with a few trees, a walking path, and a tiny playground where neighborhood kids played after school. For the past 3 years, this had been her routine. Leave the office around noon, grab her lunch bag from the break room fridge, and walk the 2 blocks to her favorite bench, the one under the oak tree where the shade hit just right and she could see the fountain in the distance. Sometimes she'd read a book. Other times she'd just sit and think, letting her mind wander away from the stress of her job. Today was no different. The September air was warm but not too hot, and there was a gentle breeze that made the leaves rustle overhead. Adrienne sat down, unwrapped her sandwich, and pulled out her tablet to catch up on some reports. She was wearing her usual work clothes, navy blue slacks, a white blouse, and comfortable flats. Her federal ID badge was clipped to her belt, though it was facing inward, not immediately visible to anyone passing by. She had just taken her first bite when she noticed the police cruiser pulling up to the curb. It wasn't unusual to see cops in the park. They patrolled the area regularly, especially during lunch hours when the park got crowded. Adrienne didn't think much of it. She watched as 2 officers got out of the car and started walking along the path, seeming to scan the area. Then they changed direction. They were walking toward her. Adrienne looked around, wondering if something had happened nearby. Maybe someone had reported a theft or there was an incident she hadn't noticed. But the park was quiet. Just her, a jogger in the distance, and an elderly couple sitting on a bench about 50 yards away feeding pigeons. The 2 officers stopped right in front of her bench. Both were white men, probably in their late 30s or early 40s. The taller one had a name tag that read Davis. The shorter, stockier one was Thompson. "Afternoon, ma'am," Officer Davis said. His tone wasn't friendly, but it wasn't hostile either. Just flat, professional, distant. Adrienne swallowed her bite of sandwich and set it down on the wrapper. "Good afternoon, officers. Is everything okay? We need to see some identification," Davis said, not answering her question. Adrienne felt a small flutter in her chest, that uncomfortable feeling that comes when you know something isn't right, but you can't quite put your finger on it. She'd felt it before, more times than she cared to count. "Can I ask what this is about?" she said calmly, keeping her voice steady. Officer Thompson shifted his weight, his thumbs hooked into his duty belt. "We've had some calls about suspicious activity in the park. We need to check everyone out." Adrienne glanced around again. The jogger had passed by without the officers giving him a second look. The elderly couple was still feeding their pigeons, completely ignored. She was the only person they had approached. "Suspicious activity," she repeated slowly. "What kind of suspicious activity are you referring to?" Davis's jaw tightened slightly. "Ma'am, we're asking the questions here. I need to see your ID now." There it was, that shift in tone, that edge that told her this wasn't a friendly chat. Adrienne had been trained for situations like this. Stay calm, don't escalate. Know your rights. She'd dealt with armed criminals, international smugglers, and dangerous investigations. But sitting in her favorite park being questioned for eating lunch, this was different. This hit somewhere deeper. "Am I being detained, officer?" she asked. "Or am I free to go?" Thompson let out an audible sigh like she was being difficult. "Look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Just show us your ID and we'll be out of your hair." "I'm sitting on a public bench in a public park eating my lunch," Adrienne said, keeping her voice level. "I'm not breaking any laws. So I'm asking again, am I being detained or am I free to go?" Davis's face reddened slightly. He pulled his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Unit 412. We've got an uncooperative individual at Riverside Park requesting backup." Adrienne's heart was pounding now, but she forced herself to stay calm. She'd been in this position before, though not quite like this. Growing up, her father had given her the talk. Not the one about birds and bees, but the one about how to survive an encounter with police when you're black in America. "Keep your hands visible. Don't make sudden movements. Stay calm. Be respectful even when they're not. Do whatever it takes to make it home alive." "I'm not being uncooperative," she said clearly. "I'm exercising my constitutional rights. I'm asking you what law I'm breaking by sitting here." "Loitering," Thompson said quickly. "We've had complaints about people loitering in this park." Adrienne almost laughed, but she caught herself. Loitering, in the middle of the day, during lunch hour. While clearly eating lunch, "I've been coming to this park for 3 years," she said. "I work right down the street. I'm on my lunch break." That's not loitering. More people were starting to notice now. A woman walking her dog had stopped on the path watching. A man in a business suit stood near the fountain, his phone out. Adrienne couldn't tell if he was recording or just checking his messages, but she hoped it was the former. Another police car pulled up. Then another. What had started as a simple conversation was turning into something much bigger. Adrienne felt that familiar weight in her chest, the one that came from years of experiences like this. Being followed in stores, being stopped in her own neighborhood, being asked for extra ID at airports even after showing her boarding pass. Death by 1,000 cuts, her mother used to call it. Officer Davis moved closer to the bench. "Ma'am, I'm going to ask you one more time. Show me your ID or we're going to have to take you into custody for obstruction." Thompson's hand moved to rest near his radio, close to his other equipment. The gesture wasn't lost on Adrienne. She'd seen it 100 times in her career. The subtle power move, the implicit threat. A sergeant had arrived now, a woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun. She approached quickly, taking in the scene. 2 officers standing over a black woman sitting on a bench. A small crowd gathering, phones out, the tension thick in the air. But before the sergeant could speak, Adrienne made a decision. She'd had enough. 3 years of peaceful lunches in this park. 3 years of minding her own business. 3 years of being a model citizen. A federal agent who dedicated her career to protecting people, and here she was being treated like a criminal for eating a sandwich. She looked up at Officer Davis, and despite everything, she smiled. Not a friendly smile. Not a happy smile, but the smile of someone who knows they're holding a winning hand and is about to play their cards. "Officers," she said, her voice calm and clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I'm going to reach into my bag now, very slowly. I'm going to show you something that I think you'll find interesting." Her hand moved deliberately toward her purse, narrating every motion to make sure there was no misunderstanding. The crowd seemed to hold its breath. The sergeant stepped closer, watching carefully. What happened next would change everything. Adrienne's hand moved slowly into her bag, each motion deliberate and careful. She'd seen too many situations go wrong because of a misunderstood gesture, a sudden movement, a moment of panic. Her fingers found what she was looking for, but she didn't pull it out yet. She wanted to say something first. "I need you all to understand something," she said, her voice carrying across the small crowd that had gathered. "I've been coming to this park for 3 years. Same bench, same time. 3 times a week, like clockwork. I've never caused any trouble. Never bothered anyone. I sit here, eat my lunch, and go back to work." Officer Davis looked uncomfortable now. The crowd was growing. At least a dozen people stood watching, and several phones were definitely recording. The woman with the dog had her phone held high. The man by the fountain had moved closer. Even the elderly couple who'd been feeding pigeons had gotten up and shuffled over to see what was happening. "Ma'am, just show us the ID," Thompson said. But his voice had lost some of its earlier edge. He'd noticed the phones, too. The sergeant, whose name tag read Rodriguez, held up a hand. "Everyone, let's just stay calm. Ma'am, if you could please show us your identification, we can sort this all out." Adrienne nodded slowly. "I'll show you my identification. But first I want to ask you something, Sergeant Rodriguez. Do you see that man over there?" She gestured with her chin toward a white jogger who had just entered the park and was stretching by a tree. "Are you going to ask him for ID? He just got here. How do you know he's not suspicious?" Rodriguez didn't answer. "And that couple over there?" Adrienne continued, pointing to the elderly pair who were now watching intently. "They've been sitting on that bench for at least 30 minutes. That's longer than I've been here. Did anyone call about them loitering?" "Ma'am, that's not—" Davis started, but Adrienne cut him off. "Let me guess," she said, and there was steel in her voice now. "The call you got said something vague. Someone sitting in the park, someone who didn't belong here, someone who made them uncomfortable. Am I right?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Adrienne reached into her bag and pulled out a leather wallet. She flipped it open slowly, holding it up so all 3 officers could see clearly. The gold badge gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. Above it, in bold letters, read, "Department of Homeland Security." "Special Agent Adrienne Mitchell," she said, her voice steady and professional. Criminal Investigations Division. Badge number 8472156. I've been with DHS for 12 years. Before that, I spent 6 years with the FBI. And you want to know something funny? The federal building where I work is literally 2 blocks that way. She pointed down the street and everyone's eyes followed her gesture. Sure enough, the large gray building with the American flag flying out front was clearly visible. Officer Davis's face had gone from red to pale in about 3 seconds flat. Thompson took an actual step backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. Rodriguez closed her eyes briefly, and Adrienne could almost see her mentally calculating how much paperwork this was going to generate. Now, Adrienne continued. Standing up from the bench for the first time, she wasn't tall, maybe 5'6", but somehow she seemed to fill the space. I want you to tell me exactly what suspicious activity I was engaged in. Was it eating a turkey sandwich? Reading reports on my tablet? Sitting while black? The last 3 words hung in the air like a thunderclap. A woman in the crowd said, "That's right." Another person started clapping. Someone else shouted, "This is ridiculous." Davis opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "Ma'am." "Special agent?" "We were just responding to a call." "We didn't know." "You didn't know," Adrienne repeated. "You didn't know, so you assumed. You saw a black woman sitting alone in a park and you assumed I didn't belong here. You assumed I was doing something wrong. You assumed I was a threat." "That's not fair," Thompson protested weakly. "We treat everyone the same, do you?" Adrienne's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through his words like a knife. "Because I've been sitting here watching. I watched a white jogger run past you without a glance. I watched you ignore that elderly couple. I'm the only person you approached. The only one you demanded ID from. The only one you called backup for." Rodriguez stepped forward, her hands raised in a placating gesture. "Special Agent Mitchell, on behalf of the department, I apologize. This is clearly a misunderstanding." "No," Adrienne said firmly. "A misunderstanding is when someone gives you the wrong address. This is racial profiling. This is what happens every single day to people who look like me. Except most of them don't have a federal badge to pull out. Most of them don't have 12 years of law enforcement experience. Most of them are just regular people trying to live their lives. And they get treated like criminals for existing in public spaces." She looked directly at Davis. "How many complaints have you gotten today about suspicious activity?" Davis hesitated. 3 or 4. "And how many of those calls resulted in you approaching someone?" Another hesitation. "Just this one." "Interesting," Adrienne said. "And I'm willing to bet that if we pulled the records, we'd find that the person who called described me as suspicious without mentioning any actual suspicious behavior. Just someone who didn't look like they belonged or was making them nervous by sitting quietly on a bench." The woman with the dog spoke up from the crowd. "I've been coming to this park for 2 years and I've seen her here tons of times."
"She's never done anything wrong."
The man with the business suit chimed in. "I work in the building next door. I see her here all the time during lunch." "This is absolutely profiling." More voices joined in. The crowd had grown to maybe 20 people now, all watching, all recording, all bearing witness to what was happening. Adrienne pulled out her phone. "I'm going to need your names and badge numbers. All 3 of you. I'll be filing a formal complaint with your department and with my agency's Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties." Rodriguez nodded quickly. "Of course. That's absolutely your right. I'll make sure you have all the information you need." "I'll also need the call log from dispatch," Adrienne continued. "The recording of the initial complaint, and any body camera footage from this interaction." "Ma'am, I'm not sure we can just," Thompson started. "You can and you will," Adrienne said, "because if you refuse, I'll be making a phone call to my supervisor, who will then make a phone call to your chief, and this will become a federal matter." "Is that what you want?" Thompson shook his head quickly. "No, ma'am." Adrienne sat back down on her bench, her sandwich still sitting there on its wrapper, probably cold by now. She looked at the 3 officers standing in front of her, all of them uncomfortable, all of them probably wishing they'd never gotten that call. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "You're going to give me all the information I requested. Then you're going to leave me alone so I can finish my lunch in peace. And then you're going to go back to your station and think really hard about what happened here today." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Because the next person you stop might not have a badge. They might just be a kid playing in the park, or someone's grandmother sitting on a bench, or a college student reading a book. and they deserve the same respect and dignity that anyone else would get. They deserve to exist in public without being treated like criminals. Rodriguez nodded slowly. You're absolutely right, Special Agent Mitchell. This shouldn't have happened. No, Adrian agreed. It shouldn't have. But it did. And it happens every day all across this country. The only difference is that today you got caught. She picked up her sandwich and took a bite, maintaining eye contact with Davis the entire time. The message was clear. She wasn't going anywhere. This was her park, her bench, her lunch break, and no one was going to take that away from her. The three officers stood there for another moment, clearly unsure of what to do next. Finally, Rodriguez pulled out a small notebook and began writing down information. Davis and Thompson exchanged glances, both looking like they wanted to be anywhere else in the world. Badge numbers, Adrienne said, pulling out her own phone to record the information. Her hands were steady, but inside her emotions were churning. Anger, frustration, exhaustion, and something else she couldn't quite name. Disappointment, maybe. After all these years in law enforcement, after everything she'd done to serve and protect, she still couldn't sit in a park without being questioned. Rodriguez recited the numbers clearly, making sure Adrienne got everything she needed. Special Agent Mitchell, I want you to know that this will be taken seriously. I'll personally ensure that a full report is filed. With all due respect, Sergeant, Adrienne said, not looking up from her phone as she typed. I've heard that before. I've heard it a lot. What I need is action, not promises. The crowd was still watching. Some people had started to drift away, but many remained as if bearing witness to the moment was important. The woman with the dog had sat down on the grass, her pet lying beside her. She wasn't leaving. Davis cleared his throat. Special Agent, we were just doing our job. We responded to a call. Your job, Adrienne interrupted, finally looking up at him, is to protect and serve the community. All of it. Not just the people who look a certain way or live in certain neighborhoods. When you respond to a vague call about someone being suspicious, your job is to assess the actual situation, not jump to conclusions based on someone's skin color. We didn't, Thompson started, but Adrienne held up a hand. Yes, you did. Let me ask you something. When you pulled up and saw me sitting here, what was the first thing you thought? Be honest, Thompson looked at the ground. Davis's jaw worked silently. Neither of them answered. That's what I thought, Adrienne said quietly. You know what I see when I look at you two? I see officers who probably went into this job wanting to help people. Maybe you had noble intentions, maybe you still do, but somewhere along the way you started seeing threats instead of people. You started making assumptions instead of assessments. A young black man in the crowd spoke up. This happened to me last month. I was waiting for my girlfriend outside a store and 3 cops rolled up asking what I was doing. They searched me right there on the sidewalk. Found nothing because I wasn't doing anything wrong. An older woman nodded. My son is a lawyer. He wears a suit to work every day. He still gets pulled over at least once a month for broken tail lights that are never actually broken. More people started sharing their stories. It was like a dam had broken. Everyone had an experience, a memory, a moment when they'd been made to feel like they didn't belong. Adrienne listened to each story, her expression growing more somber. This wasn't just about her lunch being interrupted. This was about something much bigger, something that had been happening for generations. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable as she listened. To her credit, she didn't interrupt or make excuses. She just stood there taking it all in. After a few minutes, Adrienne stood up again. You all need to understand something. I'm not special because I have a badge. I'm not more deserving of respect because I work for Homeland Security. Every single person here deserves to be treated with dignity. The teenager skateboarding over there. The mother with her kids at the playground. The homeless man sleeping on that bench across the park. Everyone. She turned back to the officers. You want to know what the real tragedy is? I'm one of you. I've been in law enforcement for almost 2 decades. I've chased down criminals, solved cases, put dangerous people behind bars. I've testified in federal court. I've worked joint operations with local police departments. And despite all of that, despite everything I've done, I still get treated like a suspect when I'm just trying to eat lunch. Davis finally found his voice. What do you want us to do? It was a simple question, but Adrienne could hear the genuine confusion in it. Maybe even a hint of remorse. I want you to think, she said. I want you to really think about the decisions you make. When you get a call about someone being suspicious, ask yourself, what are they actually doing? Are they committing a crime? Or are they just existing in a way that makes someone uncomfortable? And if it's the latter, ask yourself why. Why does that person make someone uncomfortable? Is it because of what they're doing, or is it because of what they look like? She picked up her tablet and her lunch bag, wrapping up what was left of her sandwich. I want you to imagine that every person you encounter is someone's daughter, someone's son, someone's mother or father, because they are. I'm someone's daughter. I'm someone's sister. I'm someone's colleague and friend. And I deserve better than this. The park had gone quiet. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. I'm going back to work now, Adrienne said, slinging her bag over her shoulder. I have actual criminals to catch, real threats to deal with, but I'll be following up on this complaint, and I'll be checking to see what changes, if any, come from it. She started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. One more thing. That call you responded to? I want to know who made it. Because that person needs to understand that calling 911 because you're uncomfortable with someone's presence isn't okay. It wastes police resources, and more importantly, it puts people in danger. We've all seen the news. We all know what can happen when these situations escalate. Rodriguez nodded. I'll make sure that information is included in the report. As Adrienne walked toward the park exit, the woman with the dog stood up and started clapping. Then the man in the business suit joined in. Soon, the entire crowd was applauding. It wasn't a celebration, exactly. It was more like acknowledgement, recognition, solidarity. Adrienne didn't smile or wave. She just nodded once and kept walking. She could feel the weight of everyone's expectations on her shoulders. They wanted her to be the hero, the person who would fix everything. But she knew it wasn't that simple. One confrontation, one viral video, one complaint wouldn't change a system that had been broken for decades. Still, it was something. It was a start. By the time she reached the sidewalk outside the park, her phone was already buzzing. Text messages from colleagues who'd somehow already heard about what happened. A call from her supervisor. An email from someone in the public affairs office. Word traveled fast in the law enforcement community. She answered her supervisor's call as she walked back toward the federal building. Yes, sir, I'm fine. No, it didn't get physical. Yes, I'll write up a full report when I get back to the office. Her supervisor, a veteran agent named Patterson who'd been with the agency for 30 years, listened to her brief summary, and then sighed heavily. Adrienne, you know this is going to blow up, right? Once those videos hit social media. I know, she said. Media's going to want statements. The police department's going to be in damage control mode. There's going to be pressure from all sides. I know, she repeated. Are you sure you want to pursue this? It's going to be a lot of attention, a lot of scrutiny. Adrienne stopped walking. She stood there on the sidewalk, watching people hurry past her on their way to lunch meetings and appointments, everyone absorbed in their own worlds. Normal people doing normal things without having to worry about being questioned for existing. Yes, she said firmly. I'm sure. Because if I don't do this, if I just let it slide because it's easier or because I don't want the attention, then what's the point? What's the point of having this badge if I can't use it to make things better? Patterson was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Okay, you'll have the full support of the agency, whatever you need. Thank you, sir. As she ended the call and climbed the steps to the federal building, Adrienne thought about all the people in that park, the ones who'd shared their stories, the ones who'd stood there recording, making sure there was evidence of what had happened, the ones who'd clapped, not because she was a hero, but because they were tired. Tired of being treated like they didn't matter. She thought about her father's words spoken to her when she was just 12 years old. Baby girl, the world isn't always going to be fair to you. People are going to judge you before they know you, but you can't let that stop you from being who you are. Today, she'd been exactly who she was, and tomorrow, the real work would begin. By the time Adrienne got back to her desk, the video was everywhere. Someone had uploaded it to social media with the caption, "Federal agent confronts cops who profiled her in park." Within an hour, It had 10,000 views. By the end of the workday, it was over 1 million. Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. News outlets wanted interviews. Civil rights organizations wanted to offer support. Even people she hadn't talked to in years were reaching out, sharing their own stories of being profiled or discriminated against. The whole thing felt surreal, like she was watching it happen to someone else. That evening, Adrienne sat in her small apartment, scrolling through the comments on the videos. Most were supportive, but some made her stomach turn. People saying she was playing the race card. People claiming she was just looking for attention. People insisting that the officers were just doing their job and she should have complied immediately. "You don't understand," she whispered to her screen, even though no one could hear her. "You don't understand what it's like." Her phone buzzed. It was her sister calling for the 3rd time that day. "Adri, are you okay? I saw the video, everyone's talking about it." "I'm fine, Keisha. Really? You don't sound fine. You sound tired." Adrienne leaned back on her couch, closing her eyes. "I am tired. I'm tired of having to prove I belong. I'm tired of being seen as a threat. I'm just tired." Her sister was quiet for a moment. "You know Mom would be proud of you, right? For standing up like that." Their mother had passed away 2 years earlier, and Adrienne still felt the loss like a physical ache. Her mom had been a teacher for 40 years, dedicating her life to kids in underfunded schools. She'd dealt with her own share of discrimination and prejudice, always with grace and dignity. "I hope so," Adrienne said softly. "Sometimes I wonder if I handled it right. Maybe I should have just shown them my badge immediately. Maybe I should have—" "Stop," Keisha interrupted. "You did exactly what you should have done. You stood up for yourself and for everyone else who doesn't have a federal badge to pull out. Don't second-guess yourself now." After they hung up, Adrienne tried to sleep but couldn't. Her mind kept replaying the scene in the park, the look on Davis's face, the phones recording, the crowd sharing their stories. She thought about all the times she'd been in similar situations but had just swallowed her frustration and moved on. This time felt different, though. This time she couldn't just let it go. The next morning, the police department released a statement. It was carefully worded, full of phrases like, "taking the matter seriously," and "committed to serving all members of our community." But it didn't say much of anything concrete. No mention of consequences, no acknowledgement of racial profiling, just corporate speak designed to calm things down without actually addressing the problem. Adrienne wasn't surprised, but she was disappointed. Her supervisor called her into his office that afternoon. Patterson was a good man, fair and honest, but he looked worried. "The chief of police wants to meet with you," he said. "Apparently they're launching an internal investigation." "Good," Adrienne said. "They should. He wants to do it quietly. No press, no public statements. Just handle it internally." Adrienne shook her head. "No, that's how these things get swept under the rug. That's how officers with multiple complaints keep their jobs and keep doing the same thing over and over." Patterson rubbed his temples. "I knew you were going to say that. Look, I support you, the agency supports you, but you need to understand what you're getting into. This is going to get messy. There are going to be people who don't want this story out there. People with power." "I know," Adrienne said. "But if I back down now, what message does that send? That it's okay to profile people as long as you apologize after? That federal agents deserve respect but regular citizens don't?" "You're right," Patterson said after a long pause. "You're absolutely right, so what do you want to do?" "I want a real investigation. I want to know how many other complaints Davis and Thompson have had. I want to see the training protocols for responding to suspicious person calls. And I want to talk to the person who made that call about me." Patterson nodded slowly. "I'll make some calls. We can request the complaint records through official channels. As for the caller, that might be trickier. Those reports are usually kept confidential." "Then we'll figure out another way," Adrienne said. Over the next week, things moved faster than she expected. The internal investigation revealed that Officer Davis had 2 previous complaints of racial profiling that had been dismissed as unfounded. Officer Thompson was newer to the force and had a clean record, but several officers came forward to say he often followed Davis's lead without questioning his decisions. A local civil rights attorney reached out to Adrian, offering to help pro bono. Together, they filed a formal civil rights complaint, not just about her own experience, but about the pattern of discrimination and how the department responded to suspicious person calls. The data they uncovered was damning. Over the past 3 years, the police department had responded to 847 calls about suspicious persons in public parks. Of those calls, 76% resulted in officers approaching and questioning someone, and of those interactions, 68% involved people of color, even though the city's demographics were much more evenly distributed. This is systemic, the attorney told her during one of their meetings. This isn't just about 2 officers having a bad day. This is about a department that hasn't properly trained its officers to recognize and combat their own biases. The news media picked up on the statistics. Local reporters started investigating similar patterns in other cities. National outlets began calling it part of a larger conversation about racial profiling and police accountability. Adrian agreed to do one interview with a local news station that had a reputation for fair reporting. She sat in a studio under bright lights, feeling more nervous than she'd ever felt, facing down a criminal suspect. "Special Agent Mitchell," the reporter began, "some people are saying you're making this about race when it was just a routine police interaction. What would you say to them?" Adrian had prepared for this question. She'd thought about it long and hard. "I'd say that if it were routine, the officers would have approached everyone in the park, not just me. I'd say that if race weren't a factor, I wouldn't be able to find hundreds of similar stories from other black and brown people who've had the exact same experience. And I'd ask them to really think about whether a white woman in business clothes eating a sandwich on a bench would have had 3 police cars show up. What do you hope comes from this?" the reporter asked. "Real change," Adrian said simply, "not just apologies or statements. I want police departments to look at their data and acknowledge when there are patterns of discrimination. I want better training that goes beyond a one-day seminar. I want officers to see the communities they serve as people, not threats. And I want citizens to know their rights and feel empowered to stand up when those rights are violated. Even if it means risking their safety." Adrian paused. That was the hard part, the part that kept her up at night. She knew not everyone could do what she'd done. She knew that for some people, especially young black men, challenging police officers could be dangerous, even deadly. "That's exactly why this has to change," she said finally. "No one should have to risk their safety just to exercise their constitutional rights. No one should have to be afraid of the people who are supposed to protect them." The interview aired that evening. Adrian's phone exploded with messages again, but this time they felt different. People weren't just sharing their stories anymore. They were asking what they could do, how they could help, where they could show up to make their voices heard. A community meeting was organized at a local church. Adrian wasn't sure she wanted to go, wasn't sure she wanted to be the face of this movement, but Keisha convinced her. "You started something," her sister said. "You don't have to carry it alone, but you should be there." The church was packed. Every pew was full and people lined the walls. Young and old, black and white, and everything in between. Adrian saw the woman from the park with her dog. She saw the man in the business suit. She saw faces from the videos, people who'd been there that day. The police chief was there too, sitting in the front row with Sergeant Rodriguez and several other department officials. To their credit, they'd shown up to listen. One by one, people stood and told their stories. A teenager talked about being stopped while walking home from basketball practice. A grandmother described being questioned while waiting for the bus. A young father shared how he'd been handcuffed in front of his kids because someone thought he looked suspicious playing with his own children at a playground. Each story was different, but they all had the same thread running through them. The experience of being made to feel like you didn't belong, like you were guilty of something just by existing. When it was Adrienne's turn to speak, she stood and looked out at all those faces. She felt the weight of their expectations, their hopes, their pain. "I don't have all the answers," she began honestly. "I'm just one person who got tired of staying quiet. But I think that's how change starts. One person speaking up, then another, until our voices are too loud to ignore." She looked at the police chief. "This isn't about blaming every officer or saying all cops are bad. Some of my closest colleagues are police officers. They're good people doing a hard job, but good people can still participate in broken systems. And when they do, it's everyone's responsibility to say something." The weeks that followed the community meeting were a whirlwind. Adrienne found herself in a position she'd never imagined, at the center of a movement she hadn't meant to start. But once it began, there was no stopping it. The police department, under pressure from the community and media attention, announced sweeping changes. They were implementing new training programs focused on implicit bias and de-escalation. They created a civilian review board to investigate complaints of discrimination. And they updated their protocols for responding to suspicious person calls, requiring officers to document specific behaviors rather than vague descriptions. It sounded good on paper. Adrienne wanted to believe it would make a difference. 3 months after the incident in the park, she received a call from Sergeant Rodriguez. They'd spoken a few times since that day. Awkward conversations where Rodriguez tried to apologize and Adrienne tried to accept it, while still holding the department accountable. "I wanted you to know," Rodriguez said. "Officer Davis has been terminated. The investigation found a pattern of discriminatory behavior that went back years. Thompson is on suspension and has to complete extensive training before he can return to duty." Adrienne sat down, processing this information. Part of her felt vindicated. Another part felt sad that it had taken this long, that it had required a federal agent and viral videos to get action on complaints that regular citizens had been filing for years. "What about the person who called?" Adrienne asked. "The one who reported me as suspicious?" Rodriguez hesitated. "We tracked down the call. It came from a woman who lives in one of the apartments overlooking the park. She said she'd never seen you there before and you made her nervous." "She'd never seen me before," Adrienne repeated slowly, "even though I'd been going to that park 3 times a week for 3 years." "I know," Rodriguez said quietly. "We spoke with her, explained that calling 911 because someone makes you uncomfortable isn't appropriate unless there's an actual threat or criminal activity." "And? What did she say?" "She didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She kept saying she was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe." Adrienne closed her eyes. This was the hardest part to change. Not the policies or the training, but people's hearts and minds. The way some people looked at others and saw danger instead of humanity. "Thank you for letting me know," Adrienne said. "There's something else," Rodriguez added. "I've been promoted to lieutenant. Part of my new role is overseeing the implementation of these new training programs. I wanted to ask if you'd be willing to speak to our officers. Share your perspective. Help us do better." Adrienne thought about it. The easy answer would be no. She could close this chapter of her life and move on. But easy wasn't always right. "I'll do it," she said. "But not just me. I want other community members there too. The people who shared their stories at that church meeting. The ones who don't have badges or titles. Their voices matter just as much as mine." "Deal," Rodriguez said. The first training session was held on a Saturday morning. Adrienne arrived early, her stomach in knots. She'd faced armed suspects, testified in high-stakes trials, led dangerous operations. But standing in front of a room full of police officers, many of whom probably resented being there, felt like a different kind of challenge. The room was full. About 60 officers, some looking genuinely interested, others with arms crossed and skeptical expressions. Rodriguez stood at the front and introduced Adrienne, along with 5 community members who'd agreed to share their experiences. Adrienne spoke first. She didn't sugarcoat anything. She told them exactly how it felt to be sitting peacefully in a park and suddenly be treated like a criminal. She explained how many times she'd been in similar situations and had just swallowed her frustration because fighting back felt too risky, too exhausting. "I want you to understand something," she said, looking around the room. "When you approach someone with suspicion instead of respect, you're not just doing your job. You're sending a message. You're telling that person they don't belong, that their presence is a problem, that they're guilty until proven innocent. And for people of color, that message gets sent over and over day after day until it becomes part of how we move through the world." One officer raised his hand. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with a fresh face and uncertain eyes. "But how are we supposed to know who's actually suspicious and who's not? We get these calls and we have to respond." It was a fair question, and Adrienne appreciated that he'd asked it. "That's exactly the point," she said. "You have to assess the situation based on behavior, not appearance. Ask yourself, what is this person actually doing? Are they committing a crime? Are they threatening someone? Or are they just existing? in a way that makes someone uncomfortable? Because there's a big difference. An older officer in the back spoke up. With all due respect, ma'am, we see a lot of bad stuff out there. Sometimes you have to trust your gut. I understand that, Adrienne said. I've been in law enforcement long enough to know that instincts matter, but you also have to recognize when your instincts are being influenced by bias. When your gut tells you someone's dangerous just because of how they look, that's not instinct. That's prejudice. The room was quiet, uncomfortable, but listening. The community members shared their stories next. A teenage boy talked about being stopped 6 times in 1 year, always with the same vague explanation about matching a description. An elderly woman described being questioned while gardening in her own front yard because a neighbor didn't recognize her and assumed she was trespassing. A young mother shared how terrified she'd been when officers approached her husband while he was loading groceries into their car, hands on their weapons, because someone had reported a suspicious man in the parking lot. Each story landed differently. Adrienne watched the officers' faces. Some looked genuinely troubled. Others seemed defensive. A few were clearly moved, their expressions shifting from skepticism to understanding. After the session ended, several officers approached Adrienne. One of them, a woman who'd been on the force for 15 years, had tears in her eyes. I never thought about it like that, she said. I always believed I treated everyone the same. But listening to those stories, I realized I probably have made people feel that way without even knowing it. The important thing is what you do with that realization, Adrienne told her. Awareness is just the first step. Change comes from acting differently, making different choices, even when it's uncomfortable. Life slowly returned to something resembling normal, though Adrienne knew normal would never quite be the same. She still went to the park for lunch, though now people often recognized her. Some would wave or nod. Others would stop to thank her for speaking up. The bench under the oak tree became a symbol of sorts. Someone had attached a small plaque to it that read, "This is everyone's park, everyone's space, everyone's community." Adrienne sat there one Tuesday afternoon, 6 months after everything had happened, eating her usual turkey sandwich. The park was peaceful. Kids played on the swings. A group of teenagers skateboarded near the fountain. The elderly couple who'd been there that day were back to feeding their pigeons. She thought about how one moment, one decision to stand up instead of backing down, had changed so much. The police department was different now, still far from perfect, but better than it had been. Officers were being held accountable. Communities were speaking up. Conversations were happening. But she also knew how much work was still left to do. Change didn't happen overnight. It happened in small increments, one conversation at a time, one policy at a time, one mind at a time. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from a young woman she'd met at one of the community meetings. "Just wanted to say thank you. Because of you speaking up, I found the courage to file a complaint about what happened to me. They're actually investigating it." Adrienne smiled. That was what mattered. Not the news coverage or the viral videos or the recognition. It was knowing that other people felt empowered to use their voices, to demand the respect and dignity they deserved. She finished her sandwich and pulled out her tablet to check her emails. There was one from the mayor's office asking if she'd be interested in joining a task force on police-community relations. Another from a national civil rights organization, inviting her to speak at a conference. A third from a high school, asking if she'd talk to students about careers in law enforcement and the importance of standing up for what's right. She'd answer them all later. Right now, she just wanted to sit in the sunshine and enjoy her lunch break. A patrol car rolled slowly past the park. Adrienne looked up, and the officer behind the wheel gave her a respectful nod. She nodded back. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable to anyone else, but it meant something. As she packed up her things to head back to work, she thought about her mother again, about all the times her mom had faced discrimination and handled it with such grace, about the lessons she'd taught about standing firm in who you are and never letting anyone make you feel less than. "I hope I made you proud, Mom," Adrienne whispered. She walked back toward the federal building, her head held high, ready to face whatever came next. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Change was possible. She'd seen it with her own eyes, and she'd keep fighting for it, one lunch break at a time, until every person could sit in a park without fear, without being questioned, without having to prove they belonged, because everyone belonged. Everyone deserved dignity, everyone deserved respect. That was worth fighting for. That was worth everything.